to episode 7 of Law and Batting Order. I'm your host, Tony Iliakostas. Here are some quick hits from the past week. That's right, the moment we've all been waiting for, the game that really matters, the Super Bowl. As I mentioned last week, this year's Super Bowl will be especially exciting as millions will witness across America a rematch of Super Bowl 42 between the New York Giants and the New England Patriots, one of the most historic Super Bowl matches ever. For the Pats, it's a fight for redemption. For the Giants, it's a matter of showing that they can win amidst an array of injuries and inconsistency throughout the regular season. While I think this will be a very close game, I believe the Giants will pull this off and win their second Super Bowl title in 4 years. So in the name of Super Bowl gluttony and testosterone, go Big Blue. While Texas Rangers outfielder and star slugger Josh Hamilton has led the Rangers to 2 consecutive World Series matchups, he faced a grave downfall this week. Josh Hamilton addressed the media on Friday, admitted to drinking alcohol on Monday, and apologized for his actions. Hamilton blames a moment of weakness with a family member as the reason for him having multiple drinks. Hamilton has been a victim of drug and alcohol addiction since 2001, 2 years after he was drafted as the first overall pick by the now Tampa Bay Rays. Although he stopped using drugs and alcohol since 2005, Hamilton had a relapse of alcohol use in 2009, and this recent incident makes it his second relapse in 3 years. While Josh Hamilton was very apologetic, he said that Christ is his recovery and that recovery against this temptation is an everyday process for him. After leading the UConn Huskies men's basketball team to yet another NCAA national championship game last season, men's basketball coach Jim Calhoun will be taking an indefinite medical leave of absence. Calhoun, who is 70, has been suffering for several months from spinal stenosis, which is a spinal condition that causes severe pain and hampers mobility. George Blaney, the men's Huskies assistant coach, will be coaching the team in Calhoun's absence. We wish Jim Calhoun here at Law and Batting Order a smooth and speedy recovery. Today's Order in the Court will cover negligence, one of the main branches of tort law. News broke out this week in which 4 concussion lawsuits against the National Football League will merge as one mega lawsuit and will be heard in a district court in Philadelphia. The lawsuit represents more than 300 former NFL players and their spouses, including Bears quarterback and 2-time Super Bowl champ Jim McMahon. These players are suing the NFL for negligence and intentional misconduct in response to concussion-related symptoms which these players experienced during their playing careers. While some of these players have not necessarily suffered severe traumatic brain injuries, they have suffered post-concussion symptoms, and their hope is that the NFL will monitor their future health problems. Because this is a rather dense topic, we will be covering this headline in 2 episodes. For today, let's talk strictly about the plaintiffs. What can these former NFL players argue to show that the NFL acted negligently in responding to their concussion symptoms appropriately? As mentioned earlier, negligence is one of the main branches of tort law. Unlike intentional tort, negligence simply means that an accident occurred, but it's up to the plaintiffs to prove that the defendant's actions make them liable. The common law has created the prima facie of negligence that the plaintiff must show in proving that the defendant acted negligently. First, the plaintiff must prove that the defendant had a duty of care. Second, the plaintiff must prove that the defendant breached that duty under any of the 4 applicable standards of breach of duty. We'll talk about those standards in a moment. After breach has been established, the plaintiff must prove that the defendant was the proximate and the actual cause of the plaintiff's injury. Finally, the plaintiff can show that based on the defendant's negligence, it can claim certain damages. Let's begin with duty. The attorneys for the players could argue that the NFL, whether it's individual team personnel or the entire league as a whole, had a duty to exercise reasonable care in making sure that players who sustained concussions during their playing career were properly attended to medically. The players' attorneys could also contend that the NFL had a duty to give the players proper treatment after their concussion. However, because some of these players suffered symptoms such as headaches, dizziness, and dementia well after their concussion, the players' attorneys could argue that the NFL breached that duty. There are 4 standards of breach that a plaintiff can use in proving breach of duty. They are the reasonable person standard, the cost-benefit analysis, the customary standard, and the statutory standard. The reasonable person standard asks the question, what would a reasonable, prudent person do in a situation like this? In this matter, the plaintiff's attorneys could ask, what would a reasonable, prudent league medical official or league authority do in a situation such as treating a player who has suffered a concussion during a football game. Second, the plaintiff's attorneys could also use the cost-benefit analysis argument, which says that the burden of preventing harm from occurring is less than the probability of the harm occurring times the actual harm caused. Here, attorneys for the injured party could argue that the burden of the league training team medical personnel and officials on how to handle and appropriately attend to post-concussion symptoms is less than not having such training and raising the risk of players suffering severe head trauma later in their life, which is the case for most of these players named in the lawsuit. Third, the custom standard, which is an industry standard, uses an expert who testifies as to what the custom is in a particular industry. Here, these former players could bring in a medical professional who specializes in sports injuries as an expert to testify as to what the industry standard is in treating a player who has suffered a concussion during a game and experiences post-concussion symptoms. Finally, the statutory standard is used when the defendant has violated a particular statute that is relevant to his negligent action. This standard doesn't apply in this case since there isn't a statute that the NFL necessarily violated in terms of concussion treatments for these ex-NFL players. After a breach has been established, the plaintiff's attorneys must prove that the NFL was both the actual and the proximate cause of the plaintiff's injuries. First, actual causation says that but for the defendant's act of negligence, the plaintiff's injury would not have occurred. Here, but for the NFL not properly treating these athletes medically after suffering concussions during their playing career, they would not have suffered severe post-concussion symptoms and raised the risk of traumatic brain injuries in their later life. Second, to prove proximate cause, the plaintiff's lawyer must prove sufficient evidence, circumstantial and or direct, that the injury was the immediate or foreseeable cause of the plaintiff's injury and that the defendant was not remote in time or place to the plaintiff's injury. In this case, the player's attorneys could argue that it was foreseeable in such a rigorous and intense sport like football to have an injury like a concussion. Injuries of this sort are common, and it is foreseeable that a player at any given game could be forced out due to a concussion after a tackle. Furthermore, given that these players played for the National Football League, there could be no doubt that members of NFL staff were close in time and place to the ex-player's injury. Finally, the plaintiffs could seek damages based on the extent of their injuries. Damages are meant to put the suffering party back in the place they would have been had the injury not occurred. Here, the plaintiffs could seek compensatory damages, which are out-of-pocket expenses such as medical bills and any lost wages. The players could also seek punitive damages, mainly pain and suffering damages. The attorneys for the players could argue that because of the head injuries that they sustained and the lack of appropriate care they received from the NFL, there is a likelihood that the players will suffer severe head trauma in the future, which may bar them from enjoying life and cause future pain and suffering. This is the potential argument that these 300 ex-football players could present against the NFL for the cause of action of negligence. In next week's episode, we'll talk about the possible defenses that the NFL could raise against these claims. That's the show. Leave all your comments down below, and be sure to visit Law and Batting Order at lawandbattingorder.com, so also on Facebook and Twitter. Until next time, go Giants, and have a great week, guys.